When people hear the word Vikings, they often imagine raiders, warriors, and longships cutting through foggy seas. But the Norse world was far more complex than just conquest and battle. Behind their rugged image lay a structured society governed by laws, assemblies, and a surprising amount of democratic practice, especially for the time. Understanding how the Vikings ruled means understanding the foundation of their legal system, their societal values, and how they balanced personal honor with communal responsibility. At the heart of Viking governance was a powerful idea. Law was not given by kings or gods, but maintained by the people themselves. Norse societies, particularly in Iceland and parts of Scandinavia, operated through assemblies known as things, local and regional gatherings, where free men came together to make decisions, settle disputes, and shape the rules of their communities. The idea of the thing wasn't just about law enforcement, it was the very expression of Viking self-rule. Every free man had the right to attend and speak at the thing. While not every voice carried the same weight status, wealth and alliances still mattered. It was still a forum for negotiation, debate, and decision-making by consensus. For a society that lived on the edge of survival in harsh northern climates, cooperation was not just noble, it was necessary. These things operated at various levels. The smallest were local things, held in villages or small regions. Larger things, like the Gulaing in Norway or the Altingi in Iceland, brought together representatives from across vast territories. The Altingi, established around 930 AD, is especially remarkable. It's one of the oldest parliamentary institutions in the world, predating many later European systems by centuries. But Viking democracy did not mean equality in the modern sense. Only free men had a voice. Women, slaves, and non-landowners were excluded from political life. That said, Viking women did enjoy more rights and autonomy than many of their counterparts in medieval Europe. They could own property, initiate divorce, and in some cases, wield significant influence behind the scenes. The Viking legal system was oral, relying on the memory and authority of designated legal specialists called lawspeakers. These individuals memorized the laws of their region and recited them during assemblies. Lawspeakers were deeply respected, acting as both judges and historians. Their role shows how law was not just a matter of enforcement, but also storytelling, a shared narrative that defined who the people were and how they chose to live. Laws in Viking society were not static. They evolved, adapted, and were reshaped through dialogue at the thing. If a law no longer served the community, it could be debated and changed. This flexibility gave Viking law its strength. It was alive, tied to the will and needs of the people. In a world where monarchs ruled by divine right, this grassroots approach was revolutionary. Disputes were not just settled by punishment, but often through compensation. The concept of wergild or man price assigned a monetary value to a person's life depending on their social status. If someone was injured or killed, the responsible party could pay a wergild to the victim's family to settle the matter. It was a system designed to prevent blood feuds and keep peace in tightly knit communities. However, if compensation wasn't accepted or paid, violence could erupt. Honor and vengeance were still potent forces. This tension between personal honor and communal law is key to understanding Viking rule. People were expected to defend their rights and the rights of their families, but also to submit disputes to the judgment of the thing. The balance was delicate and not always peaceful. Yet the fact that Viking societies tried to resolve conflict through law at all rather than sheer violence is what makes their system so remarkable. Viking governance wasn't centralized. There were no vast bureaucracies or sprawling empires. Power was dispersed among chieftains, assemblies, and local communities. In many ways, this made their society resilient. Local leaders had autonomy, but were still accountable to their peers at the thing. This also meant leadership was earned and often contested. A chieftain had to maintain the loyalty of his followers, not through force, but through generosity, fairness, and respect. To rule in the Viking world was to persuade, to share wealth, and to uphold law, not to command blindly. That might sound far from the image of axe-swinging berserkers, but it's the truth behind the longships and legends. This balance of personal freedom, communal law, and evolving tradition formed the foundation of Viking rule. It wasn't perfect, no system is, but it was ahead of its time in many ways. The idea that power should come from the people, that laws could be debated, and that justice was a shared responsibility. These were radical concepts in a world where kings and emperors ruled with absolute authority. In Viking society, power didn't flow from a throne or palace. It flowed from the Thingen institution that sat at the very center of Norse governance. The Thing wasn't a building or an elite council. It was a gathering, a ritual, a conversation. It was where law was spoken aloud, where justice was negotiated, and where collective decision-making came to life. If Viking society had a heartbeat, it pulsed through the Thing. The word thing, from Old Norse seating, referred both to the assembly itself and to the legal process it facilitated. But it wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about creating them, maintaining social balance, and defining what it meant to be part of the community. This was a society that valued autonomy, but also order. The thing was how they made those two forces coexist. Every free man had the right to attend the thing. This was not symbolic participation. Attendance was expected, and sometimes mandatory. In a land without a standing army or centralized law enforcement, every adult male was both a citizen and a guardian of justice. The more people present, the more legitimate the decision. Things were held outdoors, often on hills, fields, or near natural landmarks. Some thing sites were used for centuries and are still marked today. They weren't just political gatherings. They were festivals. People came not only to debate and judge, but to trade goods, hear news, arrange marriages, and settle personal disputes. Food, drink, and storytelling were part of the experience. There were multiple levels of the thing. Local things might cover a single valley or district. Regional things brought together larger communities. And at the highest level were the national things like the Alþingi in Iceland or the Gulaing in Norway, which drew representatives from vast areas. At the heart of each thing was the lawspeaker, or lögsögumaður in Old Norse. His role was essential. In a pre-literate society, law wasn't written, it was remembered. The lawspeaker had to recite the laws from memory, often over several days. His words carried legal weight. If he forgot a law or misstated it, the consequences could ripple across generations. The lawspeaker also presided over the debates, interpreted laws, and ensured that procedures were followed. But he was not a ruler. He didn't pass judgments or enforce verdicts. That responsibility lay with the assembly itself. In this way, the thing was both court and Congress, where the people were the lawmakers and the jury. One of the most striking features of the thing was its emphasis on consensus. Decisions were rarely made by simple majority vote. Instead, the goal was to reach an agreement everyone could accept or at least live with. This was more time-consuming, but it encouraged compromise and dialogue. For the Vikings, unity wasn't forced from above, it was built from below through speech and negotiation. When a dispute was brought to the thing, it could take several forms: a personal grievance, a claim of injury or theft, or even a charge of murder. Parties would bring witnesses, offer oaths, and make their case in front of the assembly. Sometimes the accused would confess and seek settlement. Other times, the crowd would deliberate, weigh reputations, and come to a judgment. In many cases, payment of wergild, monetary compensation, resolved the issue. But if parties refused the decision of the thing, the consequences could escalate into feud or exile. The thing's authority extended beyond criminal law. It regulated land ownership, trade rights, marriage rules, and religious practices. It had the power to banish individuals, strip someone of legal protection, or declare entire families as outlaws, meaning anyone could kill them without penalty. Such punishments were rare but severe, reserved for those who threatened the balance of society. Despite being male-dominated, the thing wasn't completely closed to women. In some cases, widows or heiresses could bring cases to the thing. And while they didn't vote or speak publicly in most assemblies, Viking women often influenced decisions through family ties and informal negotiation. In some sagas, we see women pushing their husbands or sons to pursue justice or vengeance at the thing. Over time, as Christianity spread and centralized monarchies emerged, the role of the thing began to change. Kings sought to use the assembly to strengthen their own authority, sometimes appointing royal officials to oversee proceedings. Written law codes gradually replaced oral tradition. But even then, the legacy of the thing endured. The Alþingi, for example, remained a cornerstone of Icelandic society even after the island came under Norwegian and then Danish rule. It was temporarily abolished in the 19th century, but later restored, and today it serves as the national parliament of Iceland. Its origins in Viking democracy are not just a source of national pride, but a reminder of the Norse commitment to participatory rule. What made the thing extraordinary wasn't its structure, but its spirit. It was loud, messy, and imperfect, but it was free. It showed that in the Norse world, power didn't belong solely to kings or warriors. It belonged to the community, to those who showed up, spoke out, and upheld the law with their voices and their presence. In the age of swords and longships, the Vikings believed in the power of speech. That belief shaped their world and continues to echo through time. For the Vikings, the concept of justice was deeply intertwined with personal honor, social balance, and communal memory. Law wasn't just a set of rules, it was an evolving agreement between individuals who lived closely together in often harsh and unforgiving environments. Disputes could flare into blood feuds, and the survival of the community depended on resolving conflict without undermining personal dignity or collective harmony. In this context, Viking law emerged not as an abstract system imposed from above, but as a social contract shaped and enforced by the people themselves. At its center was the principle of compensation rather than incarceration. The most famous example of this is the wergildaman's price. Wergild was a fixed amount of money or goods owed as restitution for an injury or killing. The amount varied depending on the status of the victim. A free man had a higher wergild than a thrall slave. A chieftain's value was higher than a farmer's. This wasn't just about economics, it reflected the importance of each individual's role in society. The wergild acknowledged that harm had been done and allowed for justice without endless revenge. If the offender or their family paid the required amount, the matter was considered settled. If they refused, or if the payment was rejected by the victim's kin, the dispute could escalate into a blood feud. These feuds, though legally recognized, were dangerous and destabilizing. Thus, the law encouraged resolution through payment and public acknowledgement rather than violence. Oaths played a vital role in Viking justice. When formal evidence was lacking, it often was individuals could swear an oath of innocence, sometimes supported by oath helpers or compurgators. These were respected members of the community who would vouch for the person's honesty. If enough trustworthy people stood by the accused, their word could tip the balance in a legal case. Trial by ordeal was occasionally used, though far less commonly than in other medieval cultures. In some areas, an accused might have to hold a red-hot iron or retrieve a stone from boiling water, with the condition that if the wounds healed cleanly, they were considered innocent. But more often, Viking legal culture preferred verbal testimony, public accountability, and negotiated settlements. The thing was the arena where these principles were enacted, but local enforcement relied on the community. There were no police in Viking society. If someone was declared guilty and refused to pay or submit, it fell to the injured party, and their kinto enforced the decision. In this way, law and honor were inseparable. To ignore a legal ruling was not just unlawful, it was dishonorable. One particularly harsh form of punishment was outlawry. To be declared an outlaw was to lose all legal protection. Anyone could kill or rob the outlaw without facing consequences. It was a social death sentence, often leading to exile, isolation, or a violent end. Outlawry served as a powerful deterrent. Being cut off from society was often more feared than imprisonment or fines. Still, the law could also be forgiving. In many cases, Those who broke the rules could regain status by paying restitution, performing public penance, or negotiating with their community. Viking justice was more concerned with restoring order than punishing offenders for its own sake. It wasn't driven by ideology or revenge, but by pragmatism and the need to keep fragile communities intact. Women in Viking society, though excluded from formal legal power, could be active participants in legal matters. They could inherit property, sue for divorce, and bring certain types of cases before the thing. In some sagas, women are seen using the law to defend their rights, claim land, or avenge a family member. While they did not serve as law speakers or judges, their voices were not absent from the legal sphere. Law also governed land ownership, trade, and alliances. Disputes over property boundaries, grazing rights, or broken trade deals were all handled through the legal process. Because wealth was closely tied to land and livestock, clarity in these matters was essential. Some laws dictated how many witnesses were needed to validate a land sale, or how long a person had to live on a plot before claiming ownership. In a world where kings were often far away or didn't exist at all, the law filled the void. It created predictability in a time of uncertainty. It told people what was expected of them and what they could expect in return. And it gave a measure of security to even the weakest members of society, provided they could find allies to defend their rights. It's important to understand that Viking law was not utopian. It favored free men, property holders, and those with strong family connections. Slaves had almost no rights. Foreigners had fewer protections. But even within its limitations, the Norse legal system stands out for its emphasis on transparency, community engagement, and resistance to arbitrary rule. Unlike in many other medieval societies, where laws were handed down by monarchs or priests, the Vikings believed that law belonged to the people. It had to be spoken aloud, remembered collectively, and defended publicly. That belief made the law both sacred and accessible. It wasn't locked in books, it lived in the memory of the law speaker, the debates of the thing, and the choices of the people. Honor and justice were two sides of the same coin. To live justly was to live honorably, and to act with honor was to respect the law, uphold your promises, and accept the judgment of your peer seven when it went against you. This culture of accountability didn't make the Viking world peaceful, but it made it durable. Through centuries of change-raids, migrations, Christianization, the commitment to law and communal governance remained a defining trait of Norse culture. It was a rough, pragmatic, and deeply human system. Not a perfect democracy, but something that carried its spirit long before that word existed. In Viking society, leadership was not defined by crowns or palaces, but by loyalty, influence, and the ability to maintain order and provide for one's people. Chieftains, jarls, and kings existed, but they ruled not by divine right or absolute authority. Their power came from the trust of those they leaded. That power could be lost as easily as it was gained. Unlike the feudal systems developing elsewhere in medieval Europe, Viking leadership was fluid and often decentralized. There were no fixed hierarchies across the Norse world. Instead, leadership roles were rooted in personal bonds, mutual benefit, and shared interest. A leader who failed to fulfill his duties, such as distributing wealth, protecting the community, or speaking justly at the thing, could quickly lose the support of his followers. At the local level, the most common authority figure was the Gothi in Iceland, or chieftain in broader Norse culture. The Gothi combined religious, legal, and political responsibilities. He would represent his followers at the thing, lead them in times of war, and host major festivals or feasts. But his authority depended on his ability to give more than he took. Generosity was essential. This concept is often referred to as the gift economy. A good leader was expected to redistribute his wealth typically gained from trade, raids, or inheritance among his supporters. Gifts weren't simply acts of kindness. They were tools of power. A chieftain who gave gold, weapons, food, or land forged strong personal bonds. Those who received were expected to offer loyalty in return. Feasting played a vital role in this relationship. Hosting large gatherings of free men was a way for leaders to display their wealth and status. These events served both social and political functions, reinforcing hierarchy, cementing alliances, and reminding people of the leader's value to the community. A leader who failed to host such gatherings was seen as weak or miserly. Despite this hierarchy, Viking society valued independence. The ideal leader wasn't a tyrant but a first among equals. He was expected to listen, to mediate, and to carry the will of his people. If he acted unfairly or became arrogant, his followers could abandon him or challenge him. Leadership could change hands without war or bloodshed, simply through a shift in allegiance. In more centralized regions like Denmark and Sweden, kings did emerge with stronger political control. But even then, they were constrained by tradition and required the approval of regional assemblies. No king ruled alone. Even the most powerful monarchs had to negotiate with landowners, warriors, and local leaders. If a king was unjust, the people could resist his ruler. In extreme cases, remove him entirely. There are historical examples of this. In Norway, the unification efforts of kings like Harald Fairhair met resistance from local chieftains who feared losing their autonomy. In Iceland, there was no king at all during the Viking Age. The country was governed by a network of Goðar and the Alþingi, with power shared and contested in a more horizontal structure. This lack of central monarchy allowed Iceland to preserve its unique legal system for centuries. Justice and leadership were inseparable. Leaders were expected to uphold the law, not override it. At the Thing, even the highest-ranking chieftain could be challenged by a free farmer if the argument was sound. The idea that anyone, regardless of birth, could participate in legal debate or witness a case was revolutionary for its time. It helped keep leaders accountable and prevented the unchecked concentration of power. What's also striking is the Viking emphasis on reputation. In a world where written contracts were rare and law was spoken, a person's word and honor were their currency. A leader who broke promises or failed to pay debts would be remembered and publicly shamed. Saga literature is full of tales where prideful kings fall, not in battle, but because they dishonored themselves through cowardice, betrayal, or injustice. This deep connection between reputation and rule meant that Viking leaders often acted as role models. They were expected to embody courage, wisdom, fairness, and generosity. They led from the front in battle and spoke last in the Thing. Their strength came not just from their sword, but from their ability to listen, compromise, and carry the weight of the law. The Viking world was not an egalitarian utopia. Wealth and lineage still mattered, and those with resources had more influence. But their system discouraged unchecked power. Authority was always conditional. Power had to be renewed constantly through acts of leadership, gestures of generosity, and respect for the shared laws of the community. Even religion supported this vision. The Norse gods, especially figures like Odin and Thor, were not distant deities demanding obedience. They were fallible, often flawed, and deeply involved in the human world. They made oaths, sought knowledge, and upheld justice in their own chaotic ways. These stories reinforced a worldview where leaders were not divine rulers, but active participants in the moral fabric of society. As the Viking Age came to a close, many of these systems evolved. Kings consolidated power, Christianity introduced new hierarchies, and written law replaced oral tradition. But the legacy of Norse governance remained. The idea that leadership must be accountable, that law belongs to the people, and that justice requires participation, these principles survived. They lived on in Scandinavian political culture, influenced the formation of early parliamentary systems, and inspired democratic ideals centuries later. The Vikings may be remembered for their ships and swords, but their greatest achievement may have been how they ruled together through speech, memory, and a stubborn belief in fairness. In a time of chaos and conflict, the Vikings built order not with thrones or empires, but with words, honor, and trust. That legacy is still felt today.